Hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am Bernard and this is JTS Wargaming. So in today's video, we're going to be painting some more Solar Auxilia tanks, only this time, instead of using the Russian 4BO modulation set, we're going to use the German Dunkelgrau modulation set, also by Ammo. And so this is a sort of a dark grayish blue color that you saw on a lot of German World War II tanks in the European theater. And so we're going to use this modulation set so that instead of just having a flat color across all of the surfaces of the tank, you're going to actually have some progression from this gray dark base all the way up to this gray highlight on all of the panels, which just takes that single, sort of drab looking color and it adds a lot of visual interest to your miniature. But before we get into the painting video, I have to shout out our only channel member at the moment, Mr. Roland Lucas. Thank you so much for your support. That means the world to me. And without further ado, let's get to painting. All right, so first we're going to spray the gray dark base from Ammo, and we're going to get a nice even all over coat of this paint. This is going to be the base that we're going to build up from. So you want to make sure you've got good coverage here. It covers fairly well, but you may want to give it 2 coats. Alright, so next we're coming in with gray base from Ammo, and we're going to spray this at roughly a 45-degree angle in a halo around the tank, as well as making sure that we hit the top surfaces of the hull. And again, you want a really nice coat of this, but don't go too heavy. You don't want to completely cover up all of the shadows that we applied previously. Right, so next we're coming in with gray light base, and we're going to hit some of the top panels sort of centered on the panel, and you want to be very light with your trigger action here. And then we're also going to take this up the sides of the panel, and we don't want to cover all of the previous paint layers that we had. We just want to add this new transition into this gray light base. And lastly, we're coming in with gray highlight. And now this is going to be very, very bright, so we want to be sparing with this. We're going to add a very, very tiny bit of this on the sides of the tank so that we have that nice 4-color transition. And then on the top of the tank, we're going to hit some of the areas that we want to be more noticeable. So like the commander's copula and the top hatches as well. All right, so we've got the base coats down for the Dunkelgrau, and as you can see, our tank is looking very, very gray. And Dunkelgrau sort of has a slight bluish tint to it, so we're going to go ahead and handle that now by using the Enamel Filter blue for dark gray. So this is a super thin enamel paint that in terms that wargamers are kind of used to is essentially an enamel glaze. If you were going to mix this up yourself, you would want 1 part enamel paint to like 10 to 15 parts thinner. You want this very, very thin and very translucent. So to use this, with enamels, you always want to give it a good shake. And just load up your brush. And then you can get the excess off back into the jar. And then with a palette or some paper towel, you want to get all of that saturated wetness from the medium out of your brush. You can even dab it on a paper towel. And so when you streak this on your hand, you should just get a very light translucent color. And now we're going to apply this all over the tank. And just like glazing with acrylics, if you're not happy with the depth of the color, you can let this dry and then come back in and do another pass. And since this is such a thin layer of paint, it will dry much, much quicker than a usual layer of enamels. So normally only a couple of hours is really all you need before you can add another layer. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of these tanks, and then I'll let that cure, and then we'll move on to the other acrylic steps afterwards. Alright, so here you can see the filter has dried on this main blade, and now we've got that nice bluish tint on top of our grays. So now we're going to move on to our other acrylic base coats, and we're going to get started with Basilicanum Gray. And now we're going to use this on all of the secondary weapon barrels, just to darken those down a bit. So that's going to be our las cannon sponsons, as well as the auto cannons and the heavy bolters. Next, we're going to hit the exposed tires on the Baneblade track system, and I would consider this an optional detail, but if you want to add it in, it will help make that section of the tank look really good. And for that, we're going to use AK rubber tires, which is another gray paint. Now this paint is very thin. A lot of the AK acrylics are meant to be used in an airbrush, but this actually works to our advantage here. Just use a smaller brush, and this will flow onto the tire very, very nicely. Alright, so next we're going to work on those tracks, and for that we're going to use Meg Polished Metal, and we'll show you a Lehman Rust this time. Again, this is another very, very thin paint, so you don't want your brush to be overloaded. But we'll just go ahead and run this along the tracks. And so if you watch my last video where I did the Malcadors and we made them really rusty, this time around we're going to go for a newer vehicle. We'll dirty them up a bit when we break out the enamels, but we want the initial base coat on these tracks to be somewhat clean and pristine. Alright, so unfortunately, all of the footage I recorded about doing the unit markings was corrupted. So I'm just going to run through what I did and show you guys what colors I used. So the tanks that I'm painting in this video are going to be a part of a battle armor formation. So I'm going to have 2 detachments of Lehman Russes and then a super heavy detachment. So in order to tell my squads apart, I went ahead and applied some unit markings. So 4 of my Lehman Russes, I just did a section of their side hull in Aldebaran Red from scale 75. The other squadron of Lehman Russes, I did their turret and that same hull section. I did that same front section in Ocean Green from P3. And then for my super heavies, so one guy is going to be a tank commander. So he got some gold embellishment on his sides. And then I also incorporated the colors from both of the Lehman Russ squadrons on some of the side armor. And then for his compatriot, he's got that same tricolor design in there. And then I just did some of his armor plates in scale 75 Arctic Blue. Oh, and I forgot to say that gold was Elven Gold from Scale 75's Metal and Alchemy range. So now we're going to get ready to dry brush. Alright, so in order to do this dry brushing, we're going to use the Dio light metal from Ammo. And this will sort of chip the armor panels for us and give us some of that definition that we need. But we do want to be very, very careful that we've got our paint exactly the way we need it. So I've got some paper towel here. Just going to get most of that paint off. And then I want to do a hand test to make sure that I'm not getting any streaking. So that looks pretty good. So let's grab our tank. And now we're going to focus this from the front to the back to simulate, damage that would naturally occur as the tank was traversing through dangerous terrain. So very lightly, we're just going to drag this over those areas, and it'll catch on all of your raised elements. And then parts of the tank that would have been protected from receiving damage, so back here, because the turret would be in the way, those areas are not going to get chipped. Alright, so next up we're going to go back to the Scale 75 Elven Gold, and we're going to paint the coils on all of the autocannons. Now this is somewhat of an optional detail, but it will add a little bit of extra color to your tanks, so I would encourage you to do so. Just be very careful not to have this spill over onto any other parts that we've already painted. So next we're going to use Black Legion contrast paint, and we're just going to black out the barrel shrouds of any las cannons that you might have on your minis. And I like to put this on my wet palette just so I have more control over how much I'm putting on my brush. But if you wanted to use it straight out of the pot, you can. Alright, so now we're gonna move on to our last acrylic step before we move into enamels. And for that, we're gonna use this chipping color from the Ammo Dio Drybrush range. And we're gonna get a nice small size 0 brush. And we've got some of this on our wet palette. And I'm going to be somewhat sparing with this, but you can use as little or as much as you like here. And places that would have received damage, I'm just going to add some scratches and dots in those areas. So like the front of these, I'm going to call them mud flaps, but I don't actually know the technical term. And then I'm also going to add some around the barrels of our main weapons. Alright, so it's time to start washing the tanks with an enamel wash. And we're going to use blue for Panzer Gray from Ammo. And this wash is specifically used for Dunkelgrau paint schemes. And so, since we're working with a small tank, we're going to apply this liberally and then remove it. So let's get started. So before we apply the wash, we just want to take some neat mineral spirits and just slightly dampen all of the armor panels. Just like this. And this will help the wash flow a little bit better and also thin it down just slightly. Since we're working with a smaller model, we don't quite want it to be full strength because we'll lose a lot of that color modulation that we have worked really hard to get in the initial steps. And with that done, we're finally ready for our wash. And we're not thinning this down any extra. We're coming straight from the pot. And we're just going to brush this all over all of the armor. We'll leave the tracks for now. We're going to use a different color on those. But just work this into all of the nooks and crannies. Alright, so here we are with the wash applied all over all of the armor, and it's going to look like a dark blue-green mess. Don't worry, we'll clean that up in a moment. But now, while that's still wet, we're going to go ahead and apply Ammo Track Wash to all of the tracks. This is a very nice sort of rich brown tone, and we're going to go ahead and coat this all over all of the tracks that are going to be visible. And you'll also want to hit the wheels if they're exposed, like on the bane blades that I'm painting here. And also make sure you run this along the sides of the tracks down at the bottom, and where the tracks sort of wrap around and lead underneath the armor. You'll want to make sure you hit under there as well. Right, so here we are with the wash fully applied, and now we're going to let this set for roughly about 5 to 10 minutes before we start removing all of that excess wash. Alright, so to remove our wash, I've got two tools here. So I've got a makeup sponge applicator, and then I finally got my hands on some of the Tamiya hobby cotton buds, and these are wound really, really tight, so they don't fray as easy as the cotton buds that you can get in your pharmacy. And I'm just using my already decanted mineral spirits. And so we're going to start with the makeup brush. And this is going to work on the really large flat panels. And all you're going to do is just lightly just drag that across the surface, and then occasionally get that excess wash off, and then keep going. And now this isn't going to fit in all of the recesses. That's when we're going to switch over to the cotton bud, because it comes to a nice point. But we want to take care of all of these broad surfaces first. Alright, so now that we've got most of those broad surfaces cleaned, I'm just going to come in with the cotton bud and get all of those hard to reach areas. Alright, so I'm going to keep going with all of my tanks. And then once these are dried, I'm probably going to leave them for at least overnight to let this enamel wash cure. But once they're all dry, we're going to go ahead and hit them with a matte coat to seal everything. And then we'll get started on those final details. Alright, so we've went ahead and applied some matte varnish, and now we're ready to work on the final details, which are going to be all of the lights scattered around the tanks. Now, to start out with, we're going to use Teneri Yellow by Scale 75, and I'm going to use these on the headlamps of the Bane Blade. Right, so we want to be very, very careful as we're applying this. It would be an utter travesty if we messed up anything that we've already painted. We just want a dot of this color on the flat. As I say that, I get it on the barrel. But we want this on the flat front-facing bit of the light. So my elbows are braced up against the table. And I'm trying to be as neat and precise as I possibly can. And now for the rest of the lights, we're going to be using the MIG crystal paints to color those in, which means first we have to give them a layer of a bright silver. So here I'm going to use Vallejo Chrome. Now, I've already chromed out the Bane Blade lights. So there's one above the autocannon, one off to the right side of the turret. Got a couple of lights on the back of the tank as well. There's a little periscope down here, and then you've got targeting lights on top of your las cannon turrets. Now, I'm going to do this Leman Russ on camera. They thankfully don't have as many lights. So there's a targeting light off to the left of the turret. And then there's two really small lights on the other side that we can hit. And then they've got this sort of, I don't even know what you'd call it, but this little thing off to the side of the commander's hatch. We'll just coat the top of that. Now that we've got that chrome paint applied, I'm going to move on to the crystal colors. And now most of my lights, I'm going to use this crystal red from the range, but they do have a wide range of colors in case you wanted a different color for your tanks. But you just want to get a little bit on a very, very tiny brush, and then you're going to dot this on to those surfaces. So we'll start with this little periscope here. And I think we'll do this big light in the back. All right, and here we are with the tanks finally complete. So I am pretty stoked. I've only got 3 more tanks that weren't in this batch to do, and then my entire Solar Auxilia force, rather, is going to be completely painted. And it's actually been a very long time since I've been able to say that I've had a completely painted army. So it's a pretty good feeling. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and learned something new. So on the channel, I showed you guys how to do green vehicles using a Russian 4BO scheme. And now you've got the blue-gray Dunkelgrau scheme out there. So let me know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. I think my next video is going to be some terrain for the game, specifically the TT Combat MDF terrain, so be on the lookout for that. I'm going to be out next week on a business trip, but if I can get that video done over the weekend, I'll set it to go live during the week while I'm away. And I think that's all I got for updates, so I will catch you all in the next video. Thanks so much for watching, and happy wargaming.